Hello, I'm David Eichholtz with David Richard Gallery, located in New York City. And we're standing today in the second floor of our Uptown location on 121st Street with Claire Seidl. And this is Claire's first solo exhibition with the gallery. And it's a body of pretty much all new work from really over the last 6 or 8 months or so. And then a few earlier paintings from 2018 to 2022 or 2021 that when we were curating them out of your studio that we felt really resonated with what we were trying to do here. And what's new about this work is what's common about these works, and that's why we're situated here, we're sort of highlighting these two because this is what's new, which is your kind of move into more vivid and brighter colors. And on the two paintings, these two smaller paintings over on the other side, are more consistent with your earlier palettes, which you consider them sort of restricted and more narrow, and both in terms of color, but also they tend to have a little tighter values. And your argument for that has been that you wanted to keep the focus pretty much on the structure of the paintings in terms of the use of drawn lines, and sort of lines that you even do with the paint, and the brush strokes, to have those sort of be the focal point as opposed to maybe being distracted through use of color. But I think what we were finding in this presentation, I think what you found obviously in your studio and when we visited, was nothing was really lost. None of the lines or the shapes or forms were lost with the addition of color. And that might be more because you were a little bit cautious or thoughtful about how you were doing the color and not getting too many colors going. That's part of what we can talk about.
That's true. Plus, I've scaled up, at least for these two, and there are more paintings in the studio. They're larger, and I think there's more space in them. Although in the smaller works, there's more space now too. I
guess I didn't realize that these were that much more significant of a scale. I remember when I walked into your studio, this was the first one I saw, and I remember thinking, wow, I said, this is really pink. I really liked it. And I was like,
pink is powerful.
And then there's another one over here that she was referring to in another one. So all three of the pink ones are in the show, but the other thing that they reveal is it's not only do they not fight with your construction and additions of the paint to kind of create this roadmap and a little bit of complexity in the paintings, but moreover, it actually gave you an interesting tool, because in these three, at least from my perspective in the essay that I wrote, I think they have different moods. And the color definitely throws the mood. Not so much if it's moody and sort of quiet or somber, but definitely enlivening them. And so here you have two things going on, is the pink and the yellow. And the yellow is much more subtle, but it adds this incredible brightness. And just like I said, it's sort of like maybe it was because we were looking at them in January and February that it was a sort of a hopeful nod towards spring. Maybe. But then you quickly cooled them down, and these other two that we'll try and point to people, and they sort of added the color adds an edge in this case, I think. So I mean, was that a thought, or because you work organically, was that just the end product without consciously thinking to do that?
I thought to do it when I was standing in front of it,
which
really? Well, that's how I work.
So cool it off
an intuitive thought.
Okay.
To subdue it somewhat. I mean, this also has a lot of light. It's a very pale painting, and I didn't want to repeat that. But I think it's the second pink one also harkens back to darker and heavier movements in smaller paintings, but it still has light, and that light color. So I think, when we go go around the corner, there's a big difference between, these 3 new ones.
Right.
And I don't know where it'll end up, because there are things in the more saturated, darker ones that I like. So I can't promise.
Well, no, I think it's been a good experiment because, as I said, I think it didn't take anything away, but instead gave you a tool to change the tone of the work very quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas when you do it with value shifts, you have to kind of key everything up to do that, or it just gets too extreme if you have a high and low value, and higher contrast. So I think given that you like to make sure that the paintings, well, clearly the artist's hand is very obvious in all the work, but the forms, I guess that was one thing. I mean, I know what the effect is when I look at them with what I guess a lot of artists would coin fragmentation, which is actually sort of used in the exhibition downstairs, the group exhibition downstairs called A Precedes B. But I'm kind of curious, so your use of line, and you don't always have a lot of line. There is some in this one. There was a couple that I was looking at that there's not as much, but what ends up happening is you obfuscate them a bit, a lot of times with bolder overstrokes. But
well, I think of the strokes as line, and the spaces between the forms as the edges of the forms are line as well. So I don't see a big distinction between
like a swath and
a swath that creates
stroke.
A form in a brushstroke,
Gotcha.
or even a line with graphite.
I see.
So
does this come out of a love of like drawing, or is there a different sort of method or a reason for that methodology? It adds a lot more energy.
I always start with drawing, and in the middle I will break things up by drawing all over it, and in the end it may end up just being drawing, or the drawing may just get lost. It's just another tool. I see, color, form, line. But I do use a lot of drawing in my paintings.
And I guess what I'm wondering about is, like, when you look at this, and ignore the color, because it really doesn't matter what the color is. To me, when I look at thinner lines in a work, and especially the way you layer them, it adds a lot of energy.
It can.
And a lot of movement, because you're literally like pointing and directing.
Right, it's
versus
gesture.
A swath. Yeah, it's more gestural as opposed to like a swath of color.
That's
which
true.
these,
True.
largely lose any kind of form, because the pink and the yellow almost become ground, except for the few places here where you sort of highlight, which I don't know if you're trying to create foci or if it's just because you're trying to create an edge effect that makes this sort of, because what this ends up doing, this painting almost becomes like this is a portal in the center.
Yes.
Was that the idea? Or you're just
Not
seeing...
necessarily. I stopped at this point. I don't really plan, I would never think I could make a portal. It just doesn't compute. But things
emerge out of
when the painting's done.
Okay, gotcha. So that is the one thing, though, that's interesting about your work is twofold. One, it's very organic. And you do sort of, with most paintings, leave them wanting more, it seems like. So it does have that sort of feeling of like immediacy and sort of freshness. It's like, it's not overworked, but yet you reveal all the process. You can see everything because of the translucent layers, and even if it's opaque, you don't obliterate with the next layer what was below.
No, I want to have that history of the painting visible.
Right. And I think that also adds to like what a lot of people refer to as like a slow painting. And people say, well, what the hell do you mean by a slow painting? And to me, what it means is you look once, you look twice, you look 3 times, and you still keep looking, because every time you look, you see something different.
Yeah.
And but then it also makes you kind of ponder why. you know, and so you try and see if is there a narrative in it? Is there some
I think
content?
you can follow what I've done in the paintings if you're used to looking at paintings.
Yeah.
And I sort of like to leave those clues, you know. The other thing I wanted to say about light is that a lot of it is from photography, you know, and
you mean your use of photography?
My use of light.
As opposed to these aren't painted from photographs.
No.
Yeah.
No. But I think there are a lot of values or tones in the work. Mm-hmm. And the photography that I do has also, I feel, restricted the palette, my palette, for a while, which I'm going to break out of one of these days.
How many decades has this been going on now?
I first mentioned it.
Well, it's funny you mention that because there are three parts of your art practice, which the paintings, obviously, the photography you mentioned, mm-hmm. and just for people who may not be familiar completely or not wandered onto your website, the photography is largely night photography. When I first encountered you and went to your website, I was sort of struck by that. And the third part is Mylar, and which tend to be a lot more line drawing, a lot more gestural, mm-hmm. But very energetic and active. But yet, now that I've met you, I've been to the studio, and I've looked at everything, and I've understood the connection. Mm-hmm. I now see the night photography as very vital to your work, the earlier work in particular, where you were making these subtle distinctions between forms based upon the values. And the values are close and tight, so you can see how you're not emulating, but you're inspired by mm-hmm. that narrow range of light in a dimly lit photo that still allows you to see form, which for most people, it's the comparative would be moonlit.
Yeah.
You know, looking at something in moonlight, and you know it's got lots of color in it during the daytime, but in moonlight, you just see values, just grays.
Right. There's very little color.
Very subtle. So, no, I did notice that about your work. Mm-hmm. And so things in a lot of your photos, like slatted chairs or anything that's sort of linear or that breaks up that, or almost has like a pattern or dimensionality, mm-hmm. becomes almost inherently the focal point, you know, in them. But it's a subtle focal point. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know, when if you compose them or if you just spontaneously you see something and it grabs you and you photograph it?
I usually set up the camera at night and open the lens for an hour, maybe longer, maybe shorter. And whatever happens, happens. And the film will pick up everything, movement, people. Sort
of Bruce Nauman-ish.
Or Super 8 Berks County filmmaking.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was for an hour. Okay.
Oh, the ones that are, you know, celestial light or in the woods at night, I leave it open for hours.
Wow.
And the only thing that can ruin it is if the sun comes up before I get up and go turn it off. It's a lot of fun, but...
Well, that's interesting. And so you mostly do these then up in Maine?
I do them all
not in Tribeca?
No, I'm not leaving my camera in Tribeca.
So, well, now that's another tidbit. I guess I didn't realize it was that long. You know, because I was thinking when you said long,
they are long.
I was thinking like maybe a minute or two.
No.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're getting bugs and all sorts of things flying by, and birds and
people, bugs.
Well, that's an interesting effect then. Okay, well then that also sort of explains, that does relate even now to the imagery a lot more. In a way,
the movement.
Yes, and the layering.
The gestures and the light.
Yes, and
maybe
so now
moving.
I see why you think these, capture time as well. It's sort of a snapshot of, you know, not just the time you paint it, but it's actually a mental snapshot of a longer period of time, some other place. So these are almost really then they come from like memory or imagination of something like that. So Not that you're painting from an image, but I'm just saying is that mystery of what happens in an hour. It's sort of like that whole thing is, well, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's around to hear it, doesn't make noise. Well, yeah, it's basically what you can say. It's like, with what you're doing. So it's that same idea, and it's all getting captured and layered in that one image.
That's right. That's right. It's just like a painting. Everything gets captured, over time on the surface.
So it's even
the rectangle.
more related than we think, even though the actual imagery is very different.
Yeah.
But the
also,
concept,
these are truly abstract, if there's such a thing. I think there is. And the photographs have the real world in them.
Right. Interesting. So this other painting is kind of a little bit of a cross between things. This is a very new one, but it's showing a lot of different things. First of all, the graphite or charcoal, looks like it's graphite. Drawing on top is still very revealed.
Yes.
But the palette is much more akin, except for the yellow, bright yellow overlay, is really much more in keeping with what you normally would do, which is keeping the values fairly tight and or more neutralized, I guess I should say, because these aren't really tight per se, but but they're more neutral. They're not as vivid, which allows them for this little bit of yellow lines that you add at the end to really sort of stand out, but not so much.
It's like punctuation.
Yeah, because it almost looks like this sort of greenish, kind of a aqua green color that you have here. Looks like you almost may have put some of that in the yellow to tone it down. Is it?
I don't remember.
So, because this looks knocked down, it doesn't look vivid, but against here, it does look vivid. So again, that's
this is a color and this is pretty gray. So
yeah. So it almost looks like that yellow got neutralized a little bit, but in the context of this overall painting, it's very vibrant and different.
And when it smears or gets palette knifed, it will pick up the color underneath it. So that will absolutely change the yellow.
Yeah, and there's other examples of where, because yellow is another kind of new addition here. There's, I think, yellow is present in pretty predominantly in 3 paintings in this show as well.
Yeah.
And one of them is literally like lemon yellow, which I was real surprised when I saw that in your studio, but it's quite stunning. And it's black and yellow, and it's got a lot of movement in it. But it's like the yellow was pretty dry though when you added the black, whereas in this other painting, it looks like you did a lot of surface mixing. Yeah. So you got a lot of this olive green, which would again kind of came back to your more traditional palette of being more neutralized and kind of knocked down a bit. But yet that yellow really brightens it up a lot. And then this one we've already talked about. So these are sort of the 3 with yellow. But yet when you play with the blues, which is also sort of a new addition, and then the same thing over with the 1. It's the yellow becomes prominent when you're mixing it. It becomes like this bright green and blue.
That's right, and then it changes.
Yeah, and so, but again, you really see, and we'll try and swing around on that one. What's nice about that one too is the surfaces on a couple of these blue ones, because surface is another thing you play with a lot. And it kind of does a number of things. Not only does it make a palpable texture, which I don't think is really your thing per se, but what it really does though is the peaks and the recessed valleys are what catch and diffract light. And so it gives you an opportunity to get an array of other values. So it can work in a lot of different ways. And in both of these paintings it does. It becomes like little mini foci, but it also, while becoming sort of like a form in and of itself, it gets diffused by doing that, it seems like.
The texture?
Yeah, the texture almost sort of diffuses it a bit.
I think also because it's overall, and it really is just the result of the painting not working for a long time, and it just gets got more and more built up.
And how do you do that? Do you dabble with the brush, or do you take like a rag and try and lift the paint and create a surface? Or
no, it's just the result of going over paint.
Oh.
You know, so if I squeegee color over what's already got paint and texture on it, it'll just pick up those, I think those are the nooks, or maybe they're the crannies.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, because they look very stippled.
It's just the way the paint dries underneath them.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, I wanted to showcase these two because first of all, they work well together because the play on the yellow. And you and I debated about that when we were installing these. But there's something about these two that work, and I think it's the yellow that brings them together. And there is a little bit of a gray and neutralized washing on that one, so there's something that pulls. But what I like is the differences in the strokes here. You know, this is done with a palette knife, and it's like a dollop almost, whereas these are all brush. And it's a nice way to show the different effects.
Yeah, I like them together now.
Now. Now that they've become immortalized. So we're going to walk over here real quick.
Okay, so, for a mood change.
So hopefully Yao can follow us. So these we put into the show. I just loved them, first of all, each one, and they're very distinct. So it sort of shows three different methodologies that you use. What's interesting about them is the palettes. So go ahead and speak about that, because this is probably more what a lot of people who know your work for years and years are going to look at and go like, oh, yeah, that looks
like her work.
That looks like her work, along with the outfit you're wearing. See, it coordinates. But why don't you kind of show what's going on here? Because these are three totally different sort of methodologies, but again, with a very tight harmonic palette.
This is very much like the painting on the left that we just
the green
looked.
one.
But instead of those, you know, quirky marks just
like
being
a little flip on it,
flips, and it's totally flips. So it's the pale color and it's the brown.
And here too, I'm just now noticing this for the first time because of what you said earlier. A lot of the brown shapes are outlined in black line.
You know what? It's not that they're black. It's the edge of the squeegee.
Oh,
so it creates a line.
Gotcha.
So it makes it even more of a kind of rectangle, an outline.
Oh, I see.
So
yeah, no, it works really well.
Another kind of drawing. And this painting is an example of one of my paintings that didn't work forever, and I just got very tired of it not working. So I painted the whole surface of it with this, I thought, very muddy brown. And I just started scraping it out.
Okay, an excavation.
And so all the yellows and these wonderful colors were underneath. And the whole drawing on it is just from scraping it. You know, I didn't add anything else.
Yeah, so all these linear lines I see now, they're like edges of
yeah, it's
of a
really
palette
hard
knife
work.
or something.
I don't want to do this again.
Okay, so no letting people think they can order a commission work. Okay.
Oh well, maybe.
But then this one's really more classic, though. I think of sort of when I think of your work, those look like extremes, and this looks more typical. But I'm just realizing now you're still squeegeeing, not squeegeeing,
a little bit,
and moving around, and that's what's creating a lot of the line here.
Also, this color is created by, you know, some graphite being picked up. How do I say this? Going in with some wax, picks up both the graphite and the yellow, and makes a brown. So there's automatically another color and texture in there.
So these like dots of...
That's just leftovers from the squeegeeing.
So it's paint, not necessarily chunks of graphite or dry pigment?
No, it's paint.
Okay.
The paint probably picked up some graphite and left it in there.
Where does the graphite come from? From the drawing?
Yes.
Wow, so you must really apply a lot of pressure then if it's releasing that much graphite.
I guess.
Or smudging, I guess, is, sort of smudging, I guess. Okay.
It's not too much. I mean, they're not panels, they're linen.
Right. But I think this little alcove we've sort of tried to lay out. Now this is a little bit more just pure line, and the painting next to it is actually the title piece, which violets are blue. And if you're wondering, no, there is no blue in there.
That's right, no blue.
But this is an interesting painting too, because it is a little bit more along the lines of this in terms of methodology, but you did introduce red, which is what kind of caught my eye.
Yeah, I like it too.
And I'm surprised it stood out so much on because you had it hanging on a red brick wall in your house. And so I was surprised that it still stood out.
See it.
Yeah, and so it looks totally different now on a white wall, but this is a really good example of, you know, in fact, now I'm just realizing there's also yellow even in here, but the red is dominant and the lines. And you really, none of the lines really got removed because this is really like a washes over it.
Yeah.
So you really see the line drawing still intact. So these I thought were good examples of, for people to see who weren't familiar with your work, of what we're talking about in the, you know, essay. What is sort of really, I think, the underpinning of your methodology, and
especially
then they can sort of
recently.
see how the color, you know, kind of migrates from there. So, and at this point, what I'm going to do is make a plug that if you like meeting artists like Claire and hearing her talk about her work and these video interviews, please subscribe. These are on our YouTube channel, and we do a number of them each month, and so it's a really great way to hear from the artist. Whether you're a curator, critic, or a collector, it's a great way to get really immersed in hearing the artist talk about their work themselves and meeting the artist.